Church. My name is John Avey, lead pastor. Welcome to Memorial Day weekend, and we want to start with a few songs. I'm going to pray for us before we dive into the songs this morning. So let's bow our heads, let's pray. Father, thank you for you. Thank you for being able to gather this morning. Thank you for Memorial Day. God, I thank you for the sacrifices that have been made, the veterans, Lord, that have sacrificed their lives for our freedom. And the ability to be able to do this morning is because of that, Lord. So we thank you for this country. We thank you for the fact we could worship publicly and without any persecution, Lord. And I pray for just this worship as we dive in the message this morning, God, that you would convict us, encourage us, God, show us as we're singing these songs, some things we need to work on in our lives, some things that maybe just we've done this week or the past week, some things we need to get just let go of, Lord. Just truly work on our hearts this morning, God, and help us to be more like you. And we thank you and love you. In Jesus' name we pray.
This morning, and the first song we're doing is No Longer Slaves. shining your everlasting light upon us. And we thank you that, Lord, that you have the power to move mountains. We know we have a lot of different mountains to move in our lives, Lord. Just habits and things and ways of the world, Lord. We just pray that you would, number one, that you would move whatever mountains are before us. Father, we also pray that our focus would be right, Lord, that we would focus on you, that we would get our focus off all the things of the world and all the things going on, and that we would just focus on what you're doing, and that our hearts are right, and that we're not in rebellion, but we're just following you.
Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning. Yeah. Some of you outside your vehicles. It's great. It's good to be outside and worshiping the Lord. So I said I had on our Facebook page. I said I had a special announcement. I don't know how special it is. Some of you probably already know what it is. But we are planning to gather again. You guys could probably see this in your bulletin. On June 7th, back at our church. So next Sunday, 31st. Technically, we can't actually meet again. We're going to come back here for one last Sunday and worship in this parking lot. Next Sunday can be a lot different. Even this Sunday, we said, sit outside your vehicle. It's totally fine. Next Sunday, though, even more, I encourage you, if you feel comfortable, get outside. We'll probably bring a few chairs with us, and we'll set up some chairs out here so we can kind of congregate or gather like we used to. So next Sunday we're going to do that, but we do it here. June 7th, we are going to go back to our building in Oakland, 169 Rice Church Road, and we're going to worship there, but we're going to do an outside service. And so the reason why we decided to do outside compared to inside is that our worship room is fairly small, and to fit everyone in it, we'd have to go to multiple services, and that's something we didn't really want to do. We wanted to stay at one service. I personally love to see everyone come together in one service so we all can see everybody. It's something that I truly enjoy, to see everyone kind of just fellowship, talk to each other, and when you do two services, you split that in a way. So we want to do it all together, one service, so we're going to do it outside. And on top of that, if we do it outside, there's not as much restrictions. We don't have to, we can still are, encouraging people to sit 6 feet apart, but it's a lot easier to do outside, a lot easier to do when you're far enough away. On top of that, we're also going to allow, if some of you still aren't comfortable with getting outside your vehicle and sitting with people, we're still going to do the drive-in style thing. So in our parking lot, if you don't want to get out and you still want to sit in your vehicle, you can just drive up, you'll be able to see everything, where our stage is going to be stationed, and you can watch it from your vehicle just like you're doing now. So that's what we're doing June 7th. Excited to kind of get back together, worshiping again, and maybe eventually we'll have some handshakes and hugs, but that's something I'm really looking forward to. So June 7th, mark your calendars, we're coming back together. You have some other announcements in your bulletins. I don't remember all of them. I know youth group is starting back up on the 7th as well. I know they're going to have a party, I think, the following Sunday. And also our meal program, we're still doing that. And if you are in need of a meal, or you know someone in need of a meal in Waterville, every single Friday we give out meals every single week. It's been such an amazing ministry we're doing, and really seeing God work through that. And so, if you know anybody in need, please let us know. So I'm going to pray one more time before we dive into the book of Ephesians. Just for the Lord to bless this time this morning. So let's bow again. Lord, thank you for you. Thank you for your word. Thank you that we can do this, God. I pray, first and foremost, as we're praying every single week for this, the coronavirus, for the spread to stop people their habit to be healed, Lord, but also for the economic impact, God, that many people are dealing with, and even just, God, the loneliness and depression this causes from social distancing. I know that many people I've heard from that are dealing with this, God. So I pray you would do your work through this, God. I've heard from many pastors, and I've seen it just in our church, of just you work this thing that is evil for your good. And I've seen so many fruits, so many things, God, that you are doing in our midst. And so while we look at this and we think this is bad, God, as you say in Romans 8:28, you work all things out for the good, God, and already we're seeing some of the good that's coming from this, Lord, and I believe even more stuff will be good as we move in the future. And the most important thing, Lord, is the eternal salvation, God, of many people that are lost, and we're seeing lost people come to know you. That right there, Lord, is what it's all about. So I pray as we dive in this morning in the book of Ephesians, you just encourage us, convict us, do whatever you need to do in our lives, Lord. As we get into the study again on submission, you just help us understand what it means to submit, and how we be imitators of you. How do we walk like you? How do we live like you, God? I pray you show us that this morning and truly mold us into the people you want us to be, God. And we love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so we are in Ephesians chapter 6 this morning. Whose Bibles, go ahead and turn there. We are at the tail end of the series in the book of Ephesians. We've been walking through the entire book, and now we're in the final chapter, chapter 6. And I've really enjoyed this study through this book. We've broken it in 3 different parts. The first 3 chapters we focused on sharing the gospel and looked at Paul. Just in those first 3 chapters, he gave some great outlines of the gospel, and we talked about how we take the gospel and share it. We even in conversations, even pray for God to give us opportunities to share the gospel. And for the past few weeks, actually a month now, we've been looking at how to live out the gospel, how to live like Jesus, how to be imitators of God. And we've looked at how we have unity inside the body, unity inside the church, how we are called on to be a family, to be united. And we also looked at some very convicting passages about how there's sin issues in our life that need to be taken care of, need to be taken out of our lives, and we need to work on these things. None of us are perfect, but our goal is to be and to look and to live like Jesus. And we all fall short of that. In the past few weeks, we've been focused on submission. It comes from chapter 5, verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so we've been looking at what it means to submit. And we need to understand, before we dive in, that submitting is something that every Christian is called to do. We are all called to submit. And to be a Christian means that we must submit. And we've looked at 3 examples. Paul, in this chapter 5, he gives us, into chapter 6, gives 3 examples of what it looks like to submit. And these 3 examples are understood to be found in a family structure. And God designed these 3 examples to point to Him. As we covered last week, and we're looking at again this week, is that the example of how we submit is found in God. And the example of how a family thrives, how a family structure works, is found in God. We look at Him. We imitate Him. We understand that if we want a healthy, thriving marriage, and as we looked at last week, children and parents, we want a healthy relationship inside the family, we must imitate God. And when we imitate God, what we will find is, we're looking at even this week, is when we imitate God, every area in our life will thrive. Every area in our life will thrive. And this is not a prosperity gospel message, okay? It's not saying, if you follow God and you pray, you're going to have wealth. It's not that at all. In fact, I would say, if you follow and you imitate God and imitate His plan for your life, you live the way He calls you to live, you will have something far better than money. Something that honestly money cannot buy. And that's joy, peace, and contentment. You have a life that God has designed for you, a life that He intended for you back in the very, very beginning. The life that was taken from us when we sinned. This week we're going to look at a text, again on the topic of submission. That is honestly more, I would probably say, more controversial than the one in chapter 5, verse 22. We talk about wives submit to your husband. You know, that's one that people, perks people's ears up. They kind of don't like that because we've seen it abused. This one has been abused. We're going to look at the passage this morning in chapter 6, verse 5. This one has been abused, and it has, many people have taken this verse and have said this is what the problem with Christianity is. People have said that because of this verse, Christianity is barbaric, it's hateful, it's not relevant anymore because of a passage that we're going to read this morning. But I think what we're going to find this morning is that when you read this and you understand the context, you understand why this verse is here, the opposite effect is what it's going to be caused in our lives. We're not going to think this verse is irrelevant. We're not going to think that Christianity is hateful. In fact, we're going to understand that in context, this is one of the most powerful verses. It's slavery we're going to talk about, but it's the most powerful verses for a slave and a master to understand. So let's dive in. We're going to be in chapter 6. And I read out the ESV Bible. Give your tablet or whatever, you can follow in the ESV, but we're going to be in chapter 6. We're going to read all of it, verse 5 through 9. It says, Bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, with sincere heart as you would Christ, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, rendering service with a good will as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether he is a bondservant or is free. Masters, do the same to them, and stop threatening, knowing that he who is both their master and yours in heaven, and that there is no partiality with him. Alright, so the first verse, verse 5, you already can see where the controversy comes from. The bondservants, obey your earthly masters. Other translations, it uses the word slaves. Some of your translations might see that. Slaves, obey your earthly masters. And automatically, you read that, slaves, obey your masters. That just doesn't sound good. And you're like, what is the Bible saying here? What is going on here? I mean, you might think this is what many have thought. Is God saying that slavery is good? Is God saying that slavery is a good thing that happened and that if you are a slave, you must obey? I mean, if you think about it in context of what these other two examples were of submission, these were good things. Like we would not say a relationship between a husband and wife is a bad thing, or a relationship between children and parents are a bad thing. And it becomes the third one, you got slaves and masters. And God is giving instructions of how slaves ought to submit to their masters. And immediately, what is this? Why is this here? The other two examples are healthy, good relationships. But slavery, I think all of us would say, is not healthy. It's not good. In fact, it should be outlawed and has been outlawed in the past 200 years around the world. Like slavery is still obviously here. It's sex slavery. There's other slavery in other countries, but here in America, for the most part, it's not well known. No one is honestly enslaved. Like we have this thing called freedom. And you'd think that shouldn't this verse be written, bondservants or slaves, rebel against your masters. Don't submit to their abuse. Shouldn't it say like no one has ownership over you, that no one should be able to tell you what to do? Shouldn't this verse say seek freedom and run from your masters? But instead, when we come to this passage, we read, slaves, obey your masters. Now, before we dive into what it tells slaves and masters to do, it's an important thing to understand here and to put in perspective when reading this passage, is that you got to understand the world that this was written into. And the culture that this was written into. People are the same, sin issues are the same, but the culture was dramatically different. And one thing you will find about that culture, and honestly, majority of the culture throughout history, slavery was a reality for many people. It's important to understand is that for around 1,800 years, if not actually more than that in some countries, slavery was a common part of Christians' lives. It was a common part to understand. I mean, slavery was abolished in 18. I don't know what the date was, but it was abolished 150, a little over 150 years ago, right? So in our own country, and you could look back, and it's not that long ago that slavery was a reality. It was a common part of many Christians' life. Many Christians were slaves. And when this was written in the first century to a town of Ephesus, it would have been understood that about 1/3 of the population would have been slaves. It's a large part of the population. 1/3 of the population would be considered a slave or a bondservant. So even though today slavery is something of the past, you don't really think of it, for the majority of history, slavery was something everyone had to deal with. And in this text, what you got to get is that in this text is no way, shape, or form saying that slavery is good. You don't find anywhere in here that is saying slavery is a good thing. Instead, it's just speaking to the reality of life. Like many people were enslaved. That's just it. And how does a relationship between a slave and a master work? And another important thing to note also here is that this relationship is meant and considered to be and understood to be a relationship inside of a family structure. I know that's hard to really understand, but this is what it's understood. Just the same way. Look at these three examples. You have husbands and wives, children and parents, slaves and masters. It's giving you an example of the slave and a master is supposed to be understood inside of a family. Like slaves would live with their masters. They would either live in another house or another building, but it was understood they would live together. And in a way, what's amazing about this is this passage is saying that you should, even before we dive into anything here, is that masters and slaves ought to see each other as family, as a unit, and they should react and live together as a family, which is so different than what we normally think of when we think of slavery. Now, you might even ask, why are we even talking about this? Like, why are we even focusing on this? Like, why do we just kind of skim over this passage? Because if none of us are truly enslaved anymore, why are we going to spend an entire message on talking about slavery? Because we all have freedom. Why? And most of us would say, I don't have a master over me. So why are we going to talk about this? So I want to kind of switch the context a little bit to kind of put it into our reality today. When we think about a slave and a master relationship, I want us to think about some person that we have to obey. Whether it be a boss, whether it be someone in government, somebody that is in a higher position to us and they are an authority over us, maybe a foreman, or even children, the parents. You think about that relationship, somebody that has authority over you. And some of us, even in this parking lot, might even be a master. You might be an authority over others. You might be a boss at work. You might own a business. You might have employees. Or I said, you might be a foreman or a manager. You have people that you are over at work. And so you have authority over some people's lives. So if you think about this and put it in that context, it really can be applied to almost all of us. And I think what we're going to find is almost all of us are going to fall into probably both of those categories. So we got the command, slaves, bondservants, obey your earthly masters first. And all of us obey, all of us in this parking lot, we obey an earthly master. We do. So right now, what I want us to do as we're going to dive in this morning, I want you to think of the person that has authority over you. And I want you to get that person in your mind. You might have multiple people that you can probably think of that are in authority over you. So you might think you're a boss at work. You might think of Janet Mills or Donald Trump. You might think of the government. You might think of a police officer. Just try to think of somebody in your life that has authority over you. And get that person in your mind as we're going to go through how we relate to them. And how do we obey them? So you got that person. Get that person in your mind. So let's go ahead and break this down. How do we obey the masters in our life? First thing we find right in the first 5. It says, bondservants, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling. Fear and trembling. These two words that go together to describe an emotion. To describe an emotion of how we obey. Like you see fear. Fear is understood to be respectful fear. In fact, some translations, they actually translate this word to respect and trembling. So this fear that we have towards our masters is more of a respectful fear. Like they're in authority over us. They have risen to this place of leadership, and I respect that of them. But then you have trembling. So they go together. You have fear and trembling. And trembling is one of these words, or it's more like an action. And it's kind of hard to describe what trembling is. When we think of trembling, we normally think of someone shaking, right? Someone trembling. My son, he's 2, and when he gets really excited, he literally shakes. It's the cutest little thing. I don't know if it's bad or if it's not good, but it is so cute. When he gets excited, he literally just shakes and until you give him the thing, and he's so excited to get it. So that's what I think of. I think of trembling. It's something, and it can come from excitement, like you're excited to get something, but also can come from fear. Like something that's going to happen to you, something bad is coming, and so you're fearful, you're afraid, and so you tremble thinking about it or at the reality of it coming. So trembling, understand, is an action that comes from an emotion. In this case, trembling comes from a respectful fear towards a person. It's kind of like putting emphasis on fear. Like it's like you're fearful, you respect this person, because this person could really change my life if they so wanted to. They have authority over me, and if they so pleased, they could radically change my life. Whether it be this person could fire me from my job, this person, even if you are a boss in a way, or you own a business, your customers are in a way masters over you. Right? They could give you a bad review that could totally ruin your business. You can think of a police officer that could give you a ticket, like they could, because you disobeyed the law. You think of the government. I mean, even now we think this is obviously reality. I mean, the government has told us certain businesses can't open, certain ones can't. We have stay-at-home orders, and you can see that there is authority over us, and because of that authority, we fear and we tremble that authority. And this should be a healthy fear and trembling if our master is going to follow what we're going to find when we get to the master's part. So the second thing we find, so first thing we got fear and trembling to the ones in authority over us. Second thing we find is we obey our earthly masters with a sincere heart. Another way to put this is work with no hidden agendas. A sincere heart, something that you can't honestly see. You can't tell someone's heart. And this is why the line follows. With a sincere heart, as you would Christ. So you work or you obey your earthly masters with a sincere heart, as you would Christ. And here's the thing. Like your boss or the one authority over you, they can't see your heart. They can't see your motives. But you know who can see your motives? Jesus can see your motives. So you work as if you are working for Jesus. Almost to say that work as if your boss can see your heart. Work as if your boss can see your intentions. They can see your mind. They know the reason why you are doing the things you're doing. And the thing that even goes on, the text goes on. In verse 6, not by the way of eye service as people's pleasers. Like here's the thing, are you doing the things you're doing at work? Are you obeying the authority to get eye service? Are you hoping that your boss or someone else will see the hard work you're doing and think, man, what an amazing person? Are you just doing these things not out of a sincere heart? Are you doing these things to get something from that person? hoping that they're going to see what you're doing, eye service, and say, wow, I'm going to give that person a raise, or whatever it might be? Are you working in order to get something from that person? Or are you obeying and submitting in hopes that you will please them? People pleaser. Using charm to get your way. You're manipulating every situation to hopefully get something out of that person. Some of us might have heard a phrase before, like a ladder climber, right? It's somebody that uses people for financial gain, even inside of social status, to get more recognition, to get more fame. You kind of just use people to climb up the ladder, and once you get above that person, whatever, you ditch them, you say, I'm done with you, I don't need you anymore. I've got what I wanted from you, and I don't care about you anymore. And many of us have been victims of somebody doing this to us, and some of you, maybe you are doing that to somebody else. And this is why we have the next couple verses in here. It's in a way to check yourself. Like, are you working? Are you doing what you're doing, submitting to the authority in your life at a sincere heart? And if not, these next verses are meant to kind of help us check ourselves, to evaluate our lives. Like, why do you do the things you do? Why do you work hard? Why do you stay loyal? And follow me on this. This is big. We obey with fear and trembling, with sincere hearts, not to please our masters, not to please the authority figure in our life, but we work hard, we do all this. This is what this passage is saying. We submit, we obey to please Christ, to please Jesus. We work with integrity as we were working for Jesus. The one that can see our motives, that can see our heart, that knows why we're doing the things we're doing. This is the point the text is trying to make, even in verse 5 and 6. I mean, you look at this, it concludes. Obey with fear and trembling, sincere heart, as you would Christ, in verse 5. And then it says, not by the way of eye service as people pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ. It's putting it in perspective. Like, do the things you do, submit, obey, as you would Jesus. And the capital off just really just nails us home to help us just truly, like, that's why I love Scripture sometimes. Just like it drives it home. Keep saying it over and over and over again, because we know it myself. I need it said over and over and over again to finally get the point. When you look at verse 7, it just really just nails it home. This is, we are to work as if we're working for Jesus. Verse 7 says, rendering service with God with a good will as the Lord, not to man. You do good as to the Lord and not to man. So I obey not to please my boss, not to please the government, not to please anybody else. I obey to please my Father. I obey to please the Lord. I obey, listen to this, I obey to please the one who is in ultimate authority over me, who is in authority of all the authority figures in our life, who is King of kings and Lord of lords. He is ruler over all things. Like, I obey to please Him. Like, we understand, this is getting back to the beginning of chapter 5, where it says, be imitators of God, walk in love as Christ loved us. We are example of Jesus to our masters, to the people in authority over us. We are an example to those people of Christ. I think sometimes we have the idea that we are to treat everyone else as Christ did. We are to act, we are to love every single person except our masters. This is not right. We are to imitate God in every area of our life. The ones in authority over us, they need Jesus just as much as the people that are under us, the people that are our friends. Every single person needs Jesus. We are to treat them all the same. Now, what about masters, though? Some of us are in the place of masters. We are in authority over others. So how do we treat those who we are in authority over? Look at verse 9. It says, masters, do the same to them. Let's love this. Like, masters, do the same. Meaning this. Masters, everything we just read that the slaves are supposed to do to you, fear and trembling, sincere heart, like to treat them as you would Christ. Masters, you are to do the same. No difference. You are to treat the people underneath you with fear and trembling. You are to respect them. You treat them just as you would anybody else. You don't have to treat them as they're under you or they're less than you. You treat them the same as you would somebody in your own family, someone the same level as you are. Be honored that you're in the position you are in, but you fear and tremble. Honestly, some of this fear and trembling needs to come from the Lord. Masters, do the same. Treat them with a sincere heart. Don't use people. Don't think of them as objects. That's the whole idea. This is why I said when you think this is like an awful thing, or this is saying that slavery is good, it's the total opposite. See, don't treat people as objects. Don't try to win people over. Don't try to, by the way of eye service, please people for your own selfish gain, to use people to advance your business or whatever it might be, to make your life easier. Don't use people in that way. Treat them as you would want to be treated. Treat them with a sincere heart, knowing that God knows every single one of your motives. And then do good to them, to the Lord, and not to man. This is one I thought about this week. Like imagine if you're in the position of authority and you treat the person under you as if the Lord was working for you. Like imagine if you are a boss, you're an authority figure, and you got people underneath you. Imagine that person that you have underneath you is Jesus. How would that change the way you treated them? Like the person that has authority over you to literally end your life at a snap of the finger at one word. Like how would it change your life? How would it change the way you treated people if that person was Jesus that works under you? I'm guessing quite a bit. And then you get one extra one, masters. Do the same to them, and then it says, stop your threatening. Stop your threatening. Stop using your authority to scare people into doing what you want. This is a form of bullying, it's a form of forced submission, which is said is evil and wrong. Submission is not forced, and as a Christian, this should never be done. Threatening is saying to somebody, if you don't do this thing, I'm going to do this, and the thing that you're going to do to that person is going to really ruin their life. And understand, threatening is different than discipline. I know we talked about discipline last week. Because discipline is when you lay out instructions for that person. Like, show up to work on time. Don't speed. Follow this rule. Follow this thing. Like, you're setting up restrictions. This is what you do. And if you don't do these things, here's the consequence that's going to happen. That's a little different. Threatening is saying, if you don't do this, I am going to inflict this on you. And it's something that I said. Threatening is using your authority to strike fear in that person for your selfish gain. So you're saying to someone, you must obey this or else this will happen. And the last thing I want to pull out of this text, the last thing I want to bring us to as we're just looking at this is how each of the sections end. How we have a section for the slave, then we have a section for the masters, and then if you look how it ends in verse 8 and then also in verse 9, there's a word that appears twice here. Verse 8 says knowing. Verse 9, same thing. You see it, stop your threatening, knowing. Knowing. And this knowing, we'll look at this in a moment, this knowing is the motivation of why we treat others like Jesus. It's the motivation that why we are set apart, why we work different, why we treat people under us differently. And first, look at this. First, bondservants, we obey. Slaves obey. Why? Knowing that whatever good anyone does, this he will receive back from the Lord. That whatever good anyone does, he will receive back from the Lord. This is great confidence. You just imagine somebody enslaved back, or even enslaved now, if people are enslaved around the world. But just imagine if you are a slave, and you have an ungodly master. You got a master that's treating you like a dog. And you open up this text, right? And you read this. You read like this is how I'm supposed to obey my master, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive back from the Lord. Like they're in bondage and they can't get out. They're stuck in this life. Their kids are born into slavery. They're treated as animals. They're sold and traded as objects. They're treated horribly. And imagine reading this and knowing that one day they will receive back from the Lord goodness. Imagine hearing this one day that you are a slave in the most awful situation in your entire life, and you know that one day you will see Christ face to face, and that all of this pain and suffering that you are dealing with will be gone. Imagine being a slave and reading this passage and saying, man, one day I'm going to have good coming from God. And everything I'm dealing with right now will be gone one day. Imagine the confidence that you get as a slave when you read this. And then masters, treat your servants, knowing that he who is both their master and yours in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. I just love how this puts this. It's saying masters, understand there's a master who is over you and who's over your slave. And that master that is over you and over everyone, you're going to have to answer to one day. And how are you treating your slave? You're going to stand before the King of Kings, who is king over you and master over you, the master of masters. And you stand before him one day. And he looks at you. Is he going to say, man, you treated your servants really well? Is he going to look at you and say, man, you treated my people terribly? There are consequences to pay. Understand, we have masters have been given responsibility to care for people on earth. It's a great responsibility. Our government has a responsibility to protect us and to make laws that care for us. Bosses, the same way. We all have masters in our life. We have a responsibility to care for God's children on earth. This is a great responsibility. We are to care for them just as much as we would ourselves. The last line in this text, I just love this. It shows God's heart. In verse 9, the last line, it says there's no partiality with him. There's no partiality with God. And you get what this means. Because if you just think of yourself enslaved, and you're reading this and it says there's no partiality with God. Meaning that in God's eyes, there's no master or slave. In God's eyes, everyone's on the same playing field. There's no rich, there's no poor, there's no powerful or weak. There's no person more important than any other. Every single person is the same in God's eyes. Imagine just reading that, thinking that people are better than you. Or you're less than somebody else. Or even if you're a person that thinks you're better than other people. And then reading this and saying, wow, in God's eyes, I am the same as every other person. Galatians 3:28, I love this verse. Paul writes this in Galatians, verse 28, chapter 3. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. You're all one. You get what this means. For for all of us, no matter who you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what sin you have done in your life, no matter what sin you have done, and just even today, last night, past week, no matter what you have done, Jesus still sees you the same. It's a level playing field. He still loves you. His desire is the same for every single person, no matter what you have done in your life. His desire is the same. This is why he came. He came to this earth so that every person may have life and have life to the full. To have a life that we were created to have, that sin destroyed. And for many of us, sin is still destroying our lives. Many people, sin is still just wrecking our lives. And it's keeping us from joy, from peace, from the life that God intended us to have and wants us to have. Jesus came to die on the cross so that the chains that kept us from him would be broken. He came to die on the cross to break the chains of sin that keep us back, that keep us enslaved. You gotta understand, like when you read this, we are all slaves to sin. Every single one of us are slaves to sin. So when you're reading this, you're reading about a master and a slave. Like how encouraging is it to know that you have a father that said, I am going to break those chains. I'm going to free you from that master. And I'm going to become your master. I'm going to become the one over you. And I'm going to love you. I'm going to treat you as my children. I'm going to be your king. I'm going to be your ruler. And I'm going to treat you better than any ruler ever has. And I'm going to treat you with love, and a love that is so unfathomable, none of us truly understand how great this love is. Guys, when reading this ought to cause so much encouragement to every single one of us. Because this is speaking the gospel in every single one of our lives. We have been freed because of Christ, because of his death, because of him raising from the grave, ascending into heaven. We have been freed from the curse of sin. And all who turn to him, all who call upon his name, will be saved, will be freed from the hateful master who is Satan. I'm going to pray, but if you have never given your life to the Lord, or maybe you're just questioning it right now, and you're saying, I don't really know, I would call you to turn to the master that loves you. Give up the life you're giving and to turn to him. Let's bow our heads, let's pray. Father, God, thank you for your word. Thank you for the encouragement that we have to know that you are our true master. You're the master of all masters. You're the master that has freed us from a hateful, unloving master, Lord. And I pray for all of us in this place that we would turn our attention to you, we would turn our focus to you, we would give our lives over to you. We surrender to you as King of our life. You are King. Whether or not majority of the world bows their knee to you or not, God, you are King. You are King. God, I pray for every single person in this parking lot, every person even listening online, wherever you're at, Lord, I pray that many people will call upon your name this morning. God, do an amazing work in all of our lives. God, help us as just a practical, Lord, practical just advice to work as if we're working for you. And for the bosses or masters, right, ones in authority, God, I pray that they will work as they're working for you. They would treat the people under them as if you were the one that was underneath them, God. Help us to be imitators of you. Help us to live a life like you would live. Help us to be examples of you on this earth, God. As we go out of this place today, in a world that is dark, in a world that is lost, I pray that we can be a light in that dark world. Give us opportunities this week, Lord, to share the gospel, to tell someone about you, God.
doing amazing work in our town, God. We ask all of this in your name, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks for joining us this morning.